cold March morning in 1964, a 9-year-old girl steps out of her house in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, with her arms full of canned goods. It is the 18th of March, a little after 8 in the morning. The cans are for a food drive at her school, a small kindness she is carrying to the nuns at St. Joseph's, the Catholic parochial school about half a mile from her front door. Her name is Maurice Ann Chivarella. She is a coal country kid, one of 5 children, with a gap between her teeth and a whole life in front of her. She kisses her family goodbye, and she walks off toward school with those cans in her arms. She never gets there. It is half a mile. On a normal morning, it is a walk of 10 minutes, maybe 15 for a 9-year-old carrying something heavy. It is the kind of walk that a child in 1964 made alone, without anyone thinking twice about it. Half a mile, through streets where her family knew the neighbors and the neighbors knew her. Somewhere inside that half mile, she disappears. When she does not arrive at school, the worry moves fast. A 9-year-old does not simply wander off on the way to class. Not one who left home minutes earlier with her arms full of cans for the food drive. Word spreads. The school makes calls, the family makes calls, and then people begin to look. By that afternoon, the search for a missing little girl has ended in the worst possible way. Her body is found about 2 miles from where she was last seen, in a strip mining pit out near the Hazleton Municipal Airport. This is coal country, and the land around the city is scarred with these pits, open wounds in the ground left behind by the mining. It is a bleak, empty place. It is the kind of place a person goes when they do not want to be seen. Maurice had been assaulted and strangled. Her wrists and her ankles had been bound with her own shoelaces. I am not going to dwell on the details of what was done to her, because she deserves better than to be reduced to the worst minutes of her life. But you need to understand the nature of it to understand what came next, and to understand why this case never let go of the town it happened in. This was not an accident. This was not a child who wandered into danger. Someone took her off that street, in daylight, on a Wednesday morning, minutes from her own front door. The cans of food she had been carrying for people in need are part of the last picture anyone has of her alive. The weight this case put on Hazleton makes sense once you know what kind of place it was. This is 1964, in the anthracite coal region of northeastern Pennsylvania. Tight streets, Catholic parishes, families who had worked the mines for generations. Hazleton was not a big city. It was the kind of place where your family name told people which church you went to and which street you grew up on. Everyone knew everyone. And Maurice Chivarella was exactly the kind of child a town like that folds itself around. 9 years old, on her way to school, carrying food to give away to people who had less. When her body is found that afternoon, the shock does not stay inside one family. It moves through every kitchen and every pew in the city. Parents who had let their children walk to school alone that morning suddenly could not imagine ever doing it again. If it could happen to Maurice on an ordinary morning, on an ordinary street, minutes from her own house, then it could happen to anyone's child. The investigator who would eventually solve this case, a state police corporal named Mark Barron, described that effect better than anyone. He said it was a vivid memory for everybody who lived through it, and a vivid memory for everybody who grew up in that area afterward. And then he said something that I think is the truest sentence anyone has said about this case. He said that what happened to her ushered in a change in that community.
That is what a crime like this actually does. It does not just take one life. It reaches into every house in a town and changes how people live in it. It ends something. Children who were alive in Hazleton in 1964 grew up in a city that was a little more afraid than it had been the day before, and they never entirely got that back.
The police threw everything they had at it. They chased leads, they questioned men, they circulated descriptions. Investigators worked the case hard, and they kept working it long after the newspapers moved on. But 1964 was a world before the tools we now take for granted. There was no national database of offenders. There was no way to take the biological evidence a killer left behind and turn it into a name. Forensic science in 1964 could tell you a great deal about how someone died. It could tell you almost nothing about who had been there. And slowly, painfully, The trail went cold. Maurice was buried. The city grieved. And her killer simply walked away into the crowd, one more face among thousands, carrying a secret he fully expected to keep. What that killer did not count on was the family he left behind. Maurice was survived by her parents and by her brothers and her sister. They lost her on a school morning, and they grew up in the shadow of that loss. Birthdays came and went. The other children became adults, had families of their own, grew older than Maurice ever got the chance to be. They passed the age she was when she died, and then they passed it by 10 years, and 20, and 40. That is a strange kind of grief, and it is particular to families like this one. Most people lose someone, and over time, the loss settles into something they can carry. But when the person you lost was 9 years old, and when nobody was ever made to answer for it, the loss does not settle. It stays open. Every year that passes is another year the answer did not come. Her sister Carmen would later put it in words that are hard to read without stopping. She said the family would always feel the emptiness and the sorrow of her absence. And she said they would go on asking themselves, what would have been? What could have been? That is 58 years of asking a question nobody could answer. And not one member of that family ever let go of it. Not one of them ever stopped asking who did this to Maurice and why he was never made to answer for it. Decades passed this way. The 1960s became the 70s, then the 80s, then a new century. The detectives who first worked the case retired. Some of them died without ever knowing the answer. The case file was passed from one investigator to the next, a folder holding a 9-year-old girl and an unanswered question, handed down like an inheritance nobody wanted and nobody was willing to put down. But there is one thing the Pennsylvania State Police never let go of either: the evidence. This is the part of the story that decides everything that follows, and it is worth sitting with for a moment because it is the least dramatic and most important decision in this entire case. Through all those years, through every change of personnel, every move of the case file, every decade in which this looked completely hopeless, the state police held on to the physical evidence from Maurice's case. Her clothing, the items collected in 1964 by investigators who had no way to test them for the thing that would eventually matter. Think about what that means. Those investigators preserved biological evidence for a technology that did not exist, that nobody had imagined, that would not be invented for another 20 years. They had no way of knowing it would ever be useful. They kept it anyway. And eventually, the science caught up. In the year 2007, the state's laboratory was finally able to develop a male DNA profile from that decades-old evidence. It came from fluid the killer had left on Maurice's jacket in 1964, and it had sat in storage for 43 years, waiting for someone to be able to read it. For the first time, investigators had a genetic fingerprint of the man who killed Maurice. It was an enormous step, and it was also, for a very long time, a heartbreaking dead end. Because a DNA profile is only useful if you have something to match it against. Here is how that system works. When someone is convicted of a serious crime in the United States, their DNA profile is entered into a national database. When investigators develop a profile from an unsolved case, they upload it, and the system searches for a match. If the person who left that evidence has ever been convicted and entered into the system, the case can close in an afternoon. So investigators uploaded the profile from Maurice's jacket, and they waited. And every time the search ran, the answer came back the same: no match. They ran it again: no match. And again: no match. Understand what that meant for the people working this case. Their killer was right there in front of them, reduced to a string of genetic code they could read letter by letter. They could describe him biologically in enormous detail. They could prove he had been there. They could match him instantly if he ever turned up. They simply could not name him. For 15 years, that profile sat in the system like a locked door with no key. 15 years of running the same search and getting the same silence. And the reason was simple, though nobody knew it at the time. The man who killed Maurice had never been convicted of anything that would have put him in that database. He was not in the system. He was never going to be in the system. They could have run that search every day for a century, and it would never have returned a name. The lead investigator, Corporal Mark Barron, refused to treat it as hopeless. To him, Maurice was not an old file. She was a little girl who deserved an answer, and a family still waiting for one. He kept pushing, and the science kept advancing. In 2018, the case took the turn that finally broke it open. Investigators teamed up with a company called Parabon Nanolabs. To explain why that mattered, I need to explain what forensic genetic genealogy actually is, because this is the mechanism that solved this case. And once you understand it, you will never look at an unsolved murder the same way again. The old approach asks one question: is this exact person in the police database? It is a yes or no question. And for most offenders, the answer is no. Forensic genetic genealogy asks a completely different question. It asks, is anybody related to this person in a database anywhere? And that changes everything. Because in the last 15 years, millions of ordinary people have spat into a tube and mailed it to a consumer ancestry company to find out where their great-grandparents came from. Many of those people then uploaded their results to public databases where anyone can search for relatives. None of those people are suspects. Almost none of them have ever committed a crime, but every single one of them is carrying a partial record of everyone they are related to. So investigators take the crime scene profile, process it into a form those genealogy databases can read, and upload it. The system does not come back and say, here is your killer. It comes back and says, here are some people who share DNA with your unknown man. This one is probably a second cousin. This one is probably a third cousin once removed. And that is where the real work starts. Because a distant cousin is not a suspect. A distant cousin is a thread. If two people are third cousins, it means they share a set of great-great-grandparents. Somewhere back in the 1800s, there is one couple who is an ancestor of both of them. So you find that couple. And then you build their family forward. Every child, every marriage, every grandchild, across 150 years, until you have constructed an enormous tree containing hundreds of living and dead descendants. Then you do it again with a second distant cousin, and a third, and you look for where those trees overlap, because the man you are looking for has to appear in all of them. And then you start eliminating. Wrong sex, wrong state, not born yet in 1964, already dead by 1964, too young, too old, living 3,000 miles away with no connection to Pennsylvania. You narrow and you narrow, and if you are very good and very patient, that enormous tree collapses down to a small number of men, and then to one. This is not laboratory work, it is archival work. Census records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, death notices, obituaries, church registries, old newspapers. It is genealogy. The hobby your relatives do to find out about their ancestors, pointed at a murder. In 2019, the profile from Maurice's jacket went into those genealogical databases. Now somebody had to do the tree, and this is where the most unlikely figure in the whole story steps in. A young man who was not even born when Maurice died. His name is Eric Schubert. He is not a detective. He is not a forensic scientist. He is not a police officer. At the time this case was solved, he was 20 years old, a college student at Elizabethtown College in Pennsylvania. What he had was an obsession. It started when he was 10 years old, building out his own family tree, and it turned into a complete love affair with genealogy. By the time he was a teenager, he had spent years teaching himself the craft of tracing families through old records and through DNA. He got good at it. Then he got better at it than most adults who do it professionally. And here is the part that is genuinely hard to believe. He did not wait until he was a trained professional to start helping. As a teenager, barely out of high school, he began offering his skills free of charge to police departments stuck on their coldest cases. One of his first requests came when he was about a week away from graduating high school, from a police department that had heard this teenager could do things with the family tree that seasoned investigators could not. Think about that for a moment. While other people his age were doing ordinary teenage things, Eric Schubert was quietly teaching himself to put names to the nameless, and then handing that away for nothing to families who had run out of hope. And at some point, he read about Maurice Chivarella. He would later describe what that did to him in plain, honest words. He said he was reading about how heinous and how terrible the crime was, and it struck him, and he knew that if he possibly could, he wanted to help. So a college student reached out to the Pennsylvania State Police and offered to work a case that had defeated investigators for more than half a century. He took the genetic matches and he started building. The way the state police later described it, Mr. Schubert began genealogical work on the family tree of a match, and very shortly, they were being handed the names of relatives scattered across the country. Understand what he was actually doing. He was taking people who shared a fraction of their DNA with an unknown murderer, and he was reconstructing the families those fractions came from, backward through generations to find common ancestors, then forward again through every branch those ancestors produced. Marriages, births, deaths, relocations, name changes, across more than a century of American records. He was turning a smear of genetic code left on a 9-year-old girl's jacket in 1964 back into a family, and then narrowing that family, branch by branch, name by name, down toward a single man. This is work that requires an enormous tolerance for tedium and an enormous unwillingness to be wrong. Every branch has to be verified. A single incorrect link, one wrong assumption about who somebody's father was, and the whole tree points at an innocent family. And finally, it pointed at one man. His name was James Paul Forte. He was born in 1941. In March of 1964, when Maurice was killed, he was 22 years old. He worked as a bartender and later as a bar supply salesman. And he was not some stranger who blew through town and vanished. He was a local man, moving through the same region, working in the kind of job where you see half the town in a week. And in nearly 6 decades of investigation, his name had never once risen to the top. He had never been a serious suspect. Now, there is an important detail here that I want to be precise about, because precision matters when you are naming a man who cannot answer. Forte's known criminal record came after Maurice's murder, not before it. In 1974, 10 years after she died, he was charged in connection with a violent sexual assault, and he pleaded guilty to aggravated assault. He served a year of probation. There was a further arrest in 1978 on lesser charges. So in 1964, when investigators were looking for someone to suspect, there was no criminal history to point at him. And in the years afterward, when he did come to the attention of the courts, the conviction he took was not the kind of felony that would have put his genetic profile into the national database decades later. That is the whole tragedy of the system in one man. He passed through the criminal justice system. He pleaded guilty. He served probation. And he still never landed in the database that investigators were searching every month. He lived out his entire life without ever being made to answer for what he did to a 9-year-old girl on her way to school. That is the detail that lands the hardest. This was not a phantom who fled to the other side of the world. He was a local man, a bartender, someone who poured drinks and made small talk, who could have been standing a few feet away from the very people searching for Maurice. For years after the murder, he was reachable. He was findable. He was walking around the same region while her family sat in a house with an empty chair in it. He hid, in the end, not in some clever way. He hid inside the limits of the science of his time. And by the time the science arrived, James Paul Forte was already dead. He died of natural causes in 1980, at the age of 38. He got 16 years of ordinary life after the murder, and then he slipped away, carrying his secret into the grave, apparently certain that no one would ever connect him to that little girl. He was wrong. It just took 58 years, and a college student with a family tree, to prove it. There was one thing left to do, and it was grim, but necessary. A family tree can point investigators toward a name. It is an extraordinary tool, but on its own, it is an argument, not a proof. To stand in front of the public and a grieving family and say this man did it, the police needed certainty. They needed to match the killer's genetic profile directly to the man himself. And the man himself had been in the ground for more than 40 years. So in January of 2022, authorities exhumed the body of James Paul Forte and took a sample from his remains. They compared it to the profile pulled from Maurice's jacket, the same profile that had come back no match, month after month, for 15 straight years. This time, it did not come back no match. It was a direct match. After 58 years, the man who murdered Maurice Civarella finally had a name, and the Pennsylvania State Police could say it out loud. It is believed to be the oldest cold case in Pennsylvania ever solved through forensic genetic genealogy, and at the time, it was reported as the fourth oldest case in the entire United States solved by this method. On the 12th of February, 2022, the Pennsylvania State Police stood in front of cameras. Beside the troopers stood the surviving family of Maurice Civarella and a 20-year-old genealogist named Eric Schubert. Corporal Mark Barron, the investigator who had refused to give up, called it an important day for a family that had waited most of their lives and for a community that had been haunted by this little girl's death for generations. And then Maurice's sister, Carmen Radke, spoke for the family. Her words were not about revenge. They were about a hole that never closed. She said their family would always feel the emptiness and the sorrow of her absence. She said they would continue to ask themselves what would have been and what could have been. And then she said the thing they had waited 58 years to be able to say. She thanked the Pennsylvania State Police, and she said that justice had been served. There is no perfect ending here, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. The man who did this was never arrested. He was never questioned about it. He was never put in front of a jury, never had to look at Maurice's family, never spent a single day in a cell for what he did. He died comfortable and free at 38 in a bed of natural causes, which is more than he ever allowed her. Nothing about February of 2022 gives the Civarella family back the sister they lost. Nothing gives Maurice back the life that was stolen from her on a March morning in 1964. She would have been 67 years old. She never got to be 10. But look plainly at what actually happened here. A 9-year-old girl walked to school one morning, carrying cans of food for people in need. And a man decided that would be the last thing she ever did. He buried the truth so deep that he lived and died believing it was safe. For 58 years, it looked like he was right. And in the end, he was undone by 2 children, by the little girl herself, who left behind, without ever knowing it, the very evidence that would one day name him. She could not fight him, and she could not escape him. But she took something from him anyway, and she held on to it for 58 years until somebody could read it. And by a young man born long after she was gone, who fell in love with family trees as a boy, and who used that gift to reach back across half a century and hand a grieving family the one thing they had been praying for. Between them, a murdered child and a college student did what a generation of detectives with every resource of their era could not. There is one more thing worth saying. The reason this case closed is not luck. It closed because a series of people did unglamorous things correctly. Investigators in 1964 collected and preserved evidence for a science that did not exist. Someone stored it properly for 43 years. A laboratory pulled the profile from it in 2007. An investigator refused to let the file go quiet, and a 20-year-old did months of archival work for free. Not one of those people could have solved it alone. Every one of them was necessary. Maurice Civarella never got to grow up, but she was not forgotten, and she was not left without an answer. Her killer thought that time was on his side. He was wrong. A little girl's long memory and a student with the family tree made sure of it. If this story stayed with you, the most useful thing you can do is leave a comment with the name of a case you think deserves this kind of attention. Cold cases get solved because people refuse to let them go quiet, and that starts with people still talking about them. Thank you for watching, and thank you for giving Maurice 58 years of your attention that she should never have needed.